Some cases are meant to be cool, some are meant to be obnoxious, but this one is meant to, well, be quiet. Howdy guys, Ponchato here, and today we'll be taking a look at the Silent Bass 600. Thanks to Be Quiet for sending this over for review, and let's get started. The Silent Bass 600 was released back in October of 2015 for around $120. It's a mid-tower case and so fits ATX, Micro ATX, and Mini ITX motherboards. It's fairly sizable at around 500mm long, 230mm wide, and 490mm in height, about 19 by 9 by 19 in inches, and owing to its steel and plastic construction, comes in at a pretty hefty 8 kilograms or around 18 pounds. As is typical with Be Quiet's packaging, the box keeps it simple and informative. The small side lists most of the specs you might need for a build, and the back shows an exploded view of the case with some information on all the bits and pieces. The case itself comes protected by styrofoam end caps and a white cloth cover to keep it free from dust. Inside the case you'll find a small box with all the mounting hardware, 6 rubberized rails to mount the hard drives with, and all the regular mounting hardware like thumb screws and motherboard standoffs. The front panel is plastic with a brushed look centerpiece, and orange accented vents run nearly the entire height. At the top are the front I/O connectors, which consist of 2 USB 3 ports, 2 USB 2 ports, and a microphone and headphone jack. Just underneath the connectors is a door that covers the 5¼ inch optical drive bays and has a large sound absorbing foam sheet. In addition to the drive bays, behind the door is an easy to remove and clean front air filter and the Silent Bass 600's built-in 3-speed fan controller, which has connections for 3 voltage controlled fans and can toggle between 6, 9, and 12 volts. Just above the connectors is the large power switch and hard drive activity LED. The LEDs are easily visible in a brightly lit room without being obnoxious at night, a nice balance. An interesting note here is that the hard drive LED actually doubles as a tiny reset switch. While I understand their reason for making it so small to prevent accidental restarts in a game or while working, it's small enough you'll need to use your fingernail to actually press it, which to me is a little excessive but could be perfect for some. Perhaps the main attraction is the left side panel, which houses a very large, clear polycarbonate window. It comes with plastic protective sheets on both sides and is beautiful once uncovered, but like all side windows, it's a fingerprint magnet, so you'll need to avoid touching it. As part of the Silent Bass 600's noise-canceling features, the side window is actually 2 separate panels with an airspace in the middle, which helps keep noise from escaping. The opposite side panel is mostly plain, save for a large Be Quiet badge. On the inside, however, it's covered with the same noise-absorbing foam as the front panel door, which should help further reduce the noise level. From the back of the case, you can see the handle for the power supply dust filter, 7 PCIe brackets, large side vent, pre-installed 120mm exhaust fan with decoupling washers, and 3 holes for external liquid cooling, maybe, but I haven't seen anyone use an external radiator since like 2006, so I don't know how useful those will be. The top panel is fairly plain, but does have some vents toward the back for exhaust, though they don't leave much room for airflow. Looking inside toward the front, we have the 3-bay, 3.5 inch hard drive cage. Be Quiet gets bonus points here for their hard drive decoupling scheme. To install the hard drives, you use the included thumb screws to attach the rubber rails to the drive. Slide it into the drive cage, lower the locking mechanism, and the drive is installed and completely isolated from the case. Very nice. The hard drive cage can also be repositioned into the 5¼ inch drive bay, though I think that would be mostly useful for aesthetic reasons. Overall, the Silent Bass 600 has room for 3 3.5 inch drives, 3 2.5 inch drives, and 3 5¼ inch drives in its default configuration. In front of the drive cage, we have a pre-installed 140mm fan with decoupling washers and room for another, though the front panel's intake is probably too restrictive for a second fan to be worthwhile. The motherboard tray has some very nice cable management options, 4 large holes with rubber grommets, more than 20mm of space in the back, and a large hole at the top rear for the CPU power cable to pass through. On the downside, there are almost no spots to anchor cable ties in the back, a pretty major feature to overlook in cable management. The back of the motherboard tray also has 2 brackets for mounting a 2.5 inch SSD, which is a pretty smart use of space. As for the backplate cutout, it's almost the size of an entire Mini ITX motherboard, so replacing your CPU heatsink without taking everything out should be pretty easy. The Silent Bass 600 can support up to 167mm CPU coolers and 290mm graphics cards, though you can remove the interior window panel for an extra 10mm for the CPU cooler, and if you move or take out the hard drive cage, it leaves 400mm for the GPU. One neat little feature they included is instead of using regular motherboard standoffs, the Silent Bass 600 has raised bumps on all the standard mounting locations. As long as your motherboard doesn't use the two less than common mounting holes, you won't need to deal with installing any standoffs at all. Continuing with the decoupling theme from the fans and hard drives, the power supply has rubber decouplers on both the bottom and rear side. This keeps the power supply completely disconnected from the case, so vibration won't transfer and make noise with the panels. There are also mounting holes for a 120 or 140 millimeter fan in the bottom of the case, which they say still leaves 160 millimeters for the power supply, though it'll be a pretty tight fit. Without a bottom fan, the Silent Base 600 leaves 290 millimeters for the power supply, more than enough for anything on the market. Technically, the Silent Base 600 supports water cooling with a front 120 or 140 millimeter radiator, rear 120 millimeter radiator, or top 240 millimeter, but it's really not set up for it. The spot at the top of the case would probably work best for a radiator, but the top panel is very restrictive and doesn't leave a lot of room for airflow. Building in the case was fairly uneventful. Being a mid-tower, you have plenty of room to maneuver parts, and the toolless hard drive installation saves a bit of time. When it came to cable management, halfway through I decided to remove the top panel, which also necessitated removing the front. I have to say these were really hard to take off because each one is held on with 6 plastic clips that you need to bend in so they aren't holding onto the case. Most other cases I've used have panels that just pop off using easy, basic, springy mounts, something Be Quiet should definitely look into. All the same, I love how much room is available on the back side of the motherboard tray. It's easily wide enough to accommodate the main ATX cable without pressing against the right side panel and bending it or flexing the entire case. With all the cables locked down, it ends up looking really attractive. The consistent orange accents inside and out work well, and as long as you shove most of the cables behind the motherboard tray, it ends up with a very clean aesthetic look, particularly with the side panel on. But now the fun part, let's talk benchmarks. My test bench is a Ryzen 5 2400G set to 3.6 GHz at 1.3 volts, cooled by an H7 Quad Lumi provided by CryoRig. The graphics card is a GTX 1063GB from Asus. The hard drive is a Western Digital Blue 1TB, and thanks to Seasonic for providing the Prime AirTouch 850W power supply. Low temps are recorded while running Prime 95 to stress the CPU and Unigen's Valley for the GPU, and cooling results are reported as deltas, degrees above ambient temperature. First, we'll look at noise from the case fans. These measurements are taken with the CPU, GPU, and power supply fans at their minimum RPM or off, and V-start here is the case fan's startup voltage, corresponding to their minimum RPM. With the fans at their minimum speed, they're effectively inaudible, and even at 50%, they're barely detectable above ambient noise. At full speed, the case hits just over 35 decibels, which I'd describe as still very quiet. Now we'll look at the hard drive noise chart. These measurements are taken with the CPU, GPU, power supply, and case fans at their minimum RPM or off. With a combination of sound deadening foam, double glazed window, and most importantly the rubber isolation mounts, hard drives are nearly inaudible in the Silent Base 600. In future reviews, you'll see how much of a difference the isolated mounting makes. It can be pretty staggering. Now here's the idle noise and temperature chart. These measurements are taken with all the fans running at 1/4 to half speed, typical cooling for idle conditions. The build is barely audible at idle, just over 30 decibels, and while idle temperatures aren't really that important unless they're way too high, indicating some other problem, it'll be interesting to note the relative difference in airflow between cases in the future. This is the CPU load temperature against the speed of the case fans. 6 degrees is a pretty big drop in delta, and I expect the exhaust fan is the main driver here. Its proximity to the CPU cooler, only about 2 inches away, helps out significantly in keeping the processor cool. The nearly linear drop in delta as fan speeds increase is further evidence of the exhaust fan's role in CPU temps. Now here's the GPU load temperature against the speed of the case fans. GPUs are much less dependent on case cooling because they almost always have vents that exhaust outside the case. You can see that here because the difference in GPU temperature between the case fans off and on full blast is only about 2 degrees. The slight increase in temperature with the case fans at minimum RPM is probably due to negative pressure inside the case. At that speed, the exhaust fan probably pulls out more air than the intake fan pulls in, so the GPU's ability to exhaust hot air out the back is hindered. And finally, load deltas and noise. These are the temperature deltas and noise under full load with the case fans at their maximum speed. The deltas here are very reasonable, corresponding to absolute temperatures of about 66 degrees in a typically cool room. As for noise, 43 decibels isn't particularly quiet nor very loud. However, I deliberately chose CPU and GPU fan speeds for case testing to stress differences in noise control, which will show up pretty clearly as my case testing list grows. The Silent Base 600 delivers well on its promise. regardless, with a bit of experimenting with fan curves, it can easily live up to the silent name. The lack of tabs to tie cables down behind the motherboard is an oversight, but Be Quiet made up for that by leaving plenty of room for the cables to fit. I'm also a really big fan of the noise reduction features. The case fans, power supply, and probably most importantly, the hard drives are all decoupled from the case, which significantly reduces the annoying resonant sounds of a computer. And besides performance, the design and color accents are well done. Not overtly obnoxious, but enough detail to be something more than a plain black box. Overall, I'm happy with it, and I like the way it's set up. If you want to get a Silent Base 600 for your next build, follow the link in the description. Hit subscribe and click the bell icon to get notified of new videos as soon as they're up. So guys, if you like this video, hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit subscribe, and if you have any questions about the Silent Base 600, leave them in the comments below. Thanks for watching, I hope I helped, and I'll see you in the next video.